Welcome, everybody. This is going to be an interesting one. Jay, how you doing?
Yeah, very well. Thank you, James. Busy weekend and busy week. It's not very often. I think this is the first time we've done back-to-back podcasts, isn't it?
Yeah,
Two double
it is.
Mondays in a row, which is
really pleased.
yeah, it's very, very good. But yeah, very well. How are you? How's your?
Very good. Excited about this one. For everybody that's watching and listening, we've got Professor Adam Nicholls with us, who's a sports and exercise psychologist. Is that correct? Is that the full title?
Yeah.
Who's written many books on how to deal with psychology in sports, not only sports, but rugby as well. He's produced a book, which I'm trying to get my way through at the moment, Rugby, Focused for Rugby. And you've got a new book out now as well, haven't you? Third edition of
third edition. Yeah, I don't know if that.
There you go. That's it.
So yeah, it's psychology in sports coaching, theory and practice, and it's just a variety of different chapters on how coaches can incorporate psychology within their coaching, and a lot of it is based on research, but it's written in a manner that is very much practical. What I try and do is I try and explain, the underpinning research, and then how the coaches can apply it within their practice.
That's cool.
Yeah,
really cool. Looking forward to getting into that. But we'll have a bit of a warm up, 5 minutes at the beginning as we do, and we'll talk a little bit about rugby, like rugby fans like to do. And I think really we can only mention the fact that the Premiership started the weekend, and how good is Ellis Genge?
Yeah, talk about making your debut for. Well, he's been there before, isn't he? Did he play senior
again?
Did he play senior rugby there though? I don't know if he was in like the academy or whatever, but for him to come home, and I know Bristol have been slapping it all over social media about him coming home and stuff like that, but to score 2 tries in the way he did in a local derby is pretty big. I'm gutted that unfortunately it didn't end up being televised for the obvious, but you got Will Butt, who used to play here and grew up through the age groups and stuff like that, and he started at outside centre, and I think he got a yellow card as well, which was I haven't messaged him yet and given him some stick about that, but yeah, I think I didn't get to watch much Premiership because I'd sort of planned to watch stuff on the Friday night, and then obviously that didn't happen, and then play myself on the Saturday, but then try and watch as many of the highlights. But did watch just again a really odd game of rugby on the Sunday with Gloucester Wasps, and Gloucester were 21-0 down at half time, down and out, and all the commentators, and as soon as they they whack out that stat of if Gloucester came back and did this, it would be their biggest Premiership comeback ever, and I was like, probably gonna do that now. But you say that a bit jestingly, but then you look back at some of the stuff Bristol have done in seasons gone by, and the way that Wasps just fell apart and Gloucester just kept building on momentum, and the shed gets behind him and stuff like that. And those 2 quick tries was just, yeah, it's funny. I don't know. I find the first game of the season, particularly at any level, really, is always a bit rusty. It doesn't matter how many pre-season games you play. Mentally coming into that sort of side of it is quite challenging. And I just thought, I played against Bridport on Saturday and they looked a bit off. We felt a bit off, and then you look at the Premiership side of it and the pro side of it, they looked a bit off as well. Just like the skill set you would expect to see at that level just needs to be a bit higher on the first opening weekend. But, people are getting into it still, aren't they?
What about yourself, Adam? Have you watched any of the rugby?
Ellis Genge he's got to be the world's best loose head prop at the moment, hasn't he? He's just amazing. I'm sure I read somewhere that he's actually kind of dedicating a bit more of himself to rugby, and I've seen videos on his Instagram where he's, with the physio doing lots of stretches, and he just looks physically, he looks really good, doesn't he, at the moment? He just looks more athletic, bigger, stronger. A massive
unstoppable, isn't he? Unstoppable at over the weekend.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for the highlights, but yeah, I mean, like you say, if that's him putting a little more effort in, makes you wonder what else he's got in the tank if he can really, focus down on things, and where could he go?
Yeah, I think, will he be coming into his prime now? Maybe the next few years are going to be his prime, aren't they? So I guess with the front row, it's a balance, isn't it, between experience and developing the strength and everything. But yeah, it's just brilliant.
He's a baby rhino at the moment. I hate to see him as a fully grown rhino, if that's the case.
Yeah.
It's spoken a lot about in the media, isn't it? He has not gone back to Bristol for anything other than personal reasons. Now, there's lots of different reasons of what personal reasons could mean, but he certainly looked happy, didn't he? When he led their song at the end, Blackbird by the Wurzels, that one. He led that and stuff like that, and the chat that the boys already had with him and stuff like that. I think you look at different types of signings. When people go for money, it's one thing, but he was actively wanted to go there. He just won the Premiership, and he's gone to a club that, when did Bristol finish? Like 7th? I don't know. It's got to be for a reason or so, isn't it? But yeah, impressed, very impressed with him.
That comment Jay just made, Adam, about him looking happy. And when we talk about players, good players that don't perform in some clubs and then perform in other clubs, there seems to be no difference in the way they train or anything like that. Is happy that much of an influence?
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of happy, being supported, your relationship with the coach, relationship with the players. And sometimes players just maybe don't get on with the coach. And I've heard examples of that in the past, and it might, or the particular coach might not be just good enough at getting the best out of certain players. But yeah, if you're happy away from the pitch, away from training, then it's one less stressor to think about, and then actually it's freeing you up to give your best when you're training, when you're playing, because you can actually concentrate fully. I think there's a myth that we see athletes as these really fit, strong people, but actually they are people. They have worries, and some of the research we've done, we've looked at stresses both during matches and outside of matches, and actually it's the stresses out in the the player's personal life and home life which actually impact upon them during matches massively. So yes, it's really important that that players are happy and I guess feel cared for, feel a sense of belonging, and feel kind of related to the environment that they're in.
Joe Marler's talked a lot about this, hasn't he? He's achieved a lot. He seems to have performed, but off the pitch, he seems to have struggled more so than on the pitch. And I did my best to read the papers that you sent through, to read and understand them as best as I could do in my limited capacity. But what I was acutely aware of reading through your papers was when you asked and that was on the stresses and the effects on matches, training, and all the rest of it, how much stuff that you wouldn't think about generally that would be a stressor, like you said, like the weather or home life, or just things like that were generally normal things that you wouldn't think you'd bring to training or a match.
Yeah, so I've done some research in the other code, Rugby League, where we pretty much managed to get most of the Super League players to complete an assessment of anxiety, depression, and well-being. And the Rugby League players actually scored higher than the general public for both anxiety and depressive states. And you think about it, a lot of it is, job insecurity. Generally, most players have a 2-year contract at most. They don't know what will happen after that if they get injured. The pressures of having to play as well. And I think this trend relates to kind of most professional athletes. When you're talking a bit about Joe Marler, it's not surprising, unfortunately, that that he is having some issues, because they are common among professional and elite athletes. They're very widespread. I think now, I certainly know in Rugby League that they're spending a lot more time and effort in terms of helping players. All of the clubs have wellbeing officers now, and they're really trying to support their mental health. But I guess there's only so much that that the clubs can do, because the underlying cause in some cases is this lack of security, knowing that they may only have 1 or 2 years more in their career, and how players can deal with that. It's difficult. So a lot of it, in terms of helping players plan for their life after sport is important. But then if you're a 22-year-old rugby player, professional player, you've not really done anything else, you probably think you're going to play for years. I remember once I was actually a dissertation student to a professional rugby union player who played England under 21s, and he played first team in the Premiership when he was 18. And he thought he was going to have he told me this himself, he thought he was going to go and play for the British Irish Lions, England lots of times. He was retired at 25, having played in the Championship for 2 seasons. And it's just, but it's that mindset and how, it's asking and encouraging players to look at, try and find things to do after their rugby career. At the time, they may not be interested in doing that because they think they're going to play forever.
And this might be something we come onto a while ago. I read years ago a player that was in a similar situation. I think he was about 18, 19, and I think he'd signed with Newcastle, and he was looking to be sort of the next big thing on the international stage, and he had a horrendous leg injury that finished his career. And he went through a few years. I wish I could remember the chap's name, but he went through a few years of depression and anxiety. And he said afterwards he came out the other side realizing he had a good education and actually he could still have a good life. But he said while he was being treated for his depression and anxiety, he said they treated him for a bereavement because it was a loss of the life he was expecting to have, because he was absolutely, nailed on. That was it. But
that's one of the key differences. If you look at like the demographics of rugby union and rugby league players, so traditionally, I can't remember what the percentage of rugby union players who have been to private school. It's very different, probably education to the majority of rugby league players. So they're probably less prepared in terms of their education for their life outside of rugby. But you still imagine that regardless of sport type, there is still that prevalence of anxiety and depression, and also reduced well-being.
All from professionalism. Do you think it was there before the game, before union went professional?
No, it's difficult to say that. It's difficult to say, but I suppose that before then the players weren't relying on it. Their sport wasn't their income, was it? Their career. I don't know, but I know it existed across all Olympic sports, team sports, individual sports. Ours was the first studying rugby league, but there's lots from different countries as well, and it's very, very similar findings.
Should we kick off our first half?
Keen, very keen.
So we've got Professor Adam Nicholls with us, who's come to help us understand the psychology side of rugby, which I've been looking forward to a long time. Adam, the first half, we're going to just ask you about yourself. I think we kick off probably, how did you get into psychology and specifically start looking at rugby?
Yes, how I got into psychology. So my plans were to be a PE teacher. So I did a degree in psychology and physical education at University of Leeds, and then you make a decision whether you're going to be a PE teacher and do a PGCHE, or I decided I wanted to go and do a master's in sports psychology. I wanted to specialize more, and I actually did think I did want to do research at that point. So kind of fairly early on. So that and how I got into psychology, I guess first I had an interest in that because I played sport, a few different sports when I was younger. So I was county tennis champion, but kind of realized I wasn't kind of fulfilling what I thought my ability was. I didn't think my results were matching what I could be doing. And I always thought I was actually lacking something in, maybe, with the stress a little bit. And then I played rugby. So I played Colts rugby. And then I, 18, and I played some adults rugby, which I think it was about national 3. I benched a few times for a club and I was a fly half. And again, it was, in training, I knew I could kick really well, and, and easy, and my percentage was really good. But when it came to some of the matches, particularly when I started playing in the adults team, it kind of went to pieces a little bit. So that was where my interest in psychology came from. And then the interest in the rugby thing's quite, how I developed in that was, so I've been a kicker myself, played golf as well. I was really interested in the kicking side of the rugby game, and I'd written a paper. My friend at the time was a head of strength and conditioning at one of the Irish provinces. So I had access to their team. So I did some research with that. Because I was really interested in kicking, I contacted John Callard. So at this time, I was living in Leeds. He lived in Harrogate. I think he still lives in Harrogate. And at this point, he had just been appointed the director of he was academy director, but had also just got the gig of being national kicking coach from England firsts all the way down to like the pathways. So we met up in a pub, and we had a chat about kind of what he was interested in, what I would be interested in doing, and then it kind of just went from there. And then the book Focus from Rugby came along through. He wanted some psychological support, and it was agreed that we kind of work together on the book, and I would offer some support to some of his players through him. And I think at that point, most sports psychologists worked actively with players, whereas he didn't want. I'm sure I could speak for me. He doesn't really like psychologists. I hope he liked me. I don't know. I'm sure he probably did a little bit, and he decided that actually, I don't want you going and speaking to whoever, or some of the players he was working with at the time. I'll do that, but I want to be, I want not advice, but information. And so a lot of the research findings, we discussed them, and actually, how it kind of relates and how he could interpret them and speak to them from players and use it as a coaching perspective. So that's how that came along. So interest in psychology through my own deficiencies, I guess. And then that rugby was linking into the kicking, mainly the kicking side, I guess, at first. But then more so the other players as well, other positions.
So did you have some psychology support when you were playing? Or was it?
No, nothing. So I'm mid-40s now, and I don't think there was much around then, to be honest. No, certainly no, nothing. And so the tennis, I played national events a few times, but there was nothing ever down there. Maybe if I'd have got a bit higher into the England team, maybe I'm sure I maybe would have got something. But there probably weren't that many qualified sports psychologists around at that point. I know this was mid-90s, mid to late 90s. I know England had Austin Swain working for them in the 1995 World Cup, because John Callard played at that World Cup there. And I know he went away with the team. But yeah, I don't think there was a great deal around at that point.
So you mentioned that you were working, I suppose, alongside John Callard when he was national kicking coach. Yeah. You didn't work directly with the kickers then. You were just giving him support, and then
when I say work with him, it was the occasional call. When we were working on the book, we'd obviously talk about things, and there was a couple of times where he maybe mentioned a player, or not by name or anything, and then no contact with the players, just through supporting him. And that's quite common now. So I had one of the people I did a PhD with. He worked for an AFL side in Melbourne in Australia, and he worked directly with the coaches. And I know quite a few others, particularly in England rugby, where they've worked and supported the coaches only, not the players. And that was under Eddie Jones as well.
Have you not done any of that then? You not worked directly with players?
Yeah, so I've worked. When I just finished my PhD, I worked with Leeds Academy for quite a few years. When I say work with them, I was a full-time academic at Leeds Beckett, but I did quite a few evenings with them. So it was so I met Stuart Lancaster just as he left the academy and then became head coach of the first team. So I worked with the guy who came in after him, Dick and Edwards. So I did quite a few things, quite a few presentations working with the club's academy players. And quite a few of them have gone on to have quite good careers. And I did quite a lot of research with the club at that point, particularly their academy players. Mm-hmm. So which was interesting. It's been interesting just to follow some of the the players' careers. Not some of them didn't participate in the research, but knowing kind of where they come from, and quite a few gone on to play for England as well. So
who's that?
Luther Burrell, Kieran Minor, did he play for England? Maybe played for England Saxons. There's a few like that. Danny Carey been there a bit earlier. Callum Clark. There was, and then just also following the guys who maybe didn't go on and do that well in rugby, but they're doing well in other areas of their career. Yeah, it's been really interesting. It's the same with golf. When I've done some studies with golfers, you just look at and you think, you see some of them when they're young and then they go on and have careers on the European tour or whatever. Yeah.
What's the the biggest difference for you when you work with, say, someone within golf or within rugby? Is there a massive difference between rugby and the other athletes you work with in different sports, or is it just it's all quite the same thing? The only difference is the type of ball they play with.
Yeah, I think when you look at those who do well in anything, well, particularly sport, I wouldn't say that there are any differences. I'd say probably the rugby players are a bit more disciplined in their training and diet and lifestyle. But then again, golf has gone that way now. But it's when I think about players I've met in the research that I've done as well. It's I wouldn't say there's a difference. There's a commonality among the high level performers in terms of their desire, their attitude. Because that's one thing I often think about. This is so when I did some bits and pieces with the academy. So Stuart Lancaster's, they were all his players at the time. Bar one, all of them were really, really good lads. All of them were such, good, hardworking, just good people. And I often wonder, I've never asked him because I'm not in contact with him at all now. That's something I probably would like to ask him in the future is, when he was picking those players for the academy, was it, how much of it was based on their character? And I think it's got to be, because a lot of it has got to be because you can't, suddenly have 15 or 16 academy lads who are all of them, they're all, just you could see the commonalities between them, and that's often something that I thought about is to what extent did he kind of see their character and pick them based on that.
It's interesting. I've been trying to get through your book. I haven't finished it yet, but there was. What was it? Mental toughness I was looking at specifically. And you go into great details in there about mental toughness, not just being that you can push through an injury or push through a play, but it's having the ability to think clearly, to understand the situation and be positive about it and create a positive outcome, even when your body might be exhausted. You're still thinking clearly. And you talk about lessons and steps in there, but surely, and also with the confidence stuff that you talk about later on in the book, how much of that is inbuilt into people to be able to do that? How much of it is coachable? How much of it is trainable?
Yes, I think, so a couple of points. I think the first one that you mentioned, so Brian Ashton wrote the foreword to the book, and he actually specifically commented on mental toughness. And he said that, you've all seen the macho player who then, goes and commits a stupid foul, which lets the team down. That's not mental toughness, even though he might, be an aggressive player. That's not mental toughness. But yeah, so how much of it can be developed? See, so a few years ago, I gave a presentation to the Super League Academy managers. So this was based on most of the Academy League managers there were all ex-pros, hardened Rugby League international pros who are now, academy directors. And I get the general feeling from them is that you've either got mental toughness or you don't have mental toughness. So basically, my presentation was a bit of a waste of time, really, because I can't develop it. If they don't have it, they don't have it. So yeah, so there is evidence based to show that mental toughness can be improved. So there's been interventions that are being carried out. There was one really good one by some researchers in Wales with the English Cricket Academy players. It was conducted over a number of years. And what they did is they created stressful situations for the players. So by that, they'd ask them to perform under pressure. So it might be bowling or batting drills. and there will be a consequence. So if you, I don't know, you don't perform well, you have to do more fitness training, or you have some form of consequence without being, not bullying, but just to give the player something to, a bit of stress. They would then teach them some stress management techniques. And what they found is that players can get used to performing under pressure and performing well under pressure, which is what I think mental toughness is essentially. Being able to make effective decisions under pressure. And that study showed that it can be increased. And I think there's lots of other research that's shown that we can improve people's ability to play under stressful situations.
It's interesting you talk about stuff like that, because something as a coach that I hear other coaches talk a lot about is, there's two things that coaches bang on about, and they go, one is they never have enough time with players. You speak to if I speak to an academy coach, they haven't got enough time with their players, and they see him 6 days a week. You speak to one of the under 15 coaches down here, and he sees his group of players once a week. That's not enough time either. So what is enough time? But then the other side of it is how they make them, particularly in an under 18 sort of environment and below, how they make people more resilient to when stuff goes wrong. So when the referee does something they don't like, when they feel that it's not going their way, when it's hammering it down, when it's cold, how do you create those sort of environments at training, particularly in a grassroots sort of environment? So what would you say to a coach that's, on their own, working with a group of players? How do you stop your under 11s team when it starts, getting all rainy and horrible? How do you stop them from going, actually, mum, dad, I don't want to play on Sunday? How do you train for that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Is that this lack of time that coaches have, and across all levels of the game, so why would they dedicate any time to spending time with the players for psychology when they don't have enough time for what they see maybe perhaps more important areas or other areas that they need to work on?
Which is a wrong mindset, because
but then if you're in that situation where what's the solution then? So one thing I kind of do when I work with coaches is trying to incorporate some key psychological principles within the coaching practice. So working with the coaches so they can develop an environment in which players feel supported, cared for, but also challenged. I think that's the crucial aspect. Because if you don't feel challenged when you're training, how can you then deal with that in a match situation? So it's about increasing the levels of challenge and stress within training, but at the same time supporting the players and teaching them how to manage that stress. It might not be, it's simple things. So deep breathing techniques, blocking out if the referee is being given some wrong calls, accepting that maybe all referees will make bad calls. So again, just 5-minute conversations in training and matches, start of matches. Whatever the referee does today, we're not going to let that get on top of us. We've got to accept the decisions that have been made, and then we will then focus on the next thing that we're going to do, which is what we've been working on in training. And so I guess things like that. So trying to incorporate. So in terms of enhancing pressure, smaller sided games, decreasing the size of the pitch, just little things to give players less time on the ball, less time to make decisions, which will then offer them solutions of how they can then try and deal with that situation. It might be, releasing the ball quicker or looking into space more effectively, and that then building that in and then progressing that as they improve, and then hopefully that should transform into matches. So that's a simple way, but I think highly effective way of incorporating some key psychological principles within training, which can then go through into match situations without necessarily sitting down. Some teams probably don't have a clubhouse either where their players can all sit down and they can talk and give presentations. So you don't need that at all. But it's about kind of working with the resources that you have to try and implement those key messages, I think.
It's really interesting. We had Mike Ford on a few podcasts ago, and he was talking about when he was at Bath and how he was creating the the ability for players to get over stresses in the game. And he was saying exactly that, wasn't he? That he would set up a game, tell the one side that they could commit fouls, and tell the referee to ignore them, just to see how the other team coped with something that seemed unfair within the game. The referee wasn't picking up on it; they were getting away with it. How did it affect them mentally, and how did they cope with it?
Yeah, we've done that before here and stuff like that, and I'm a big fan of it. I'd always choose the open side and say, look, for this semi-contact game, there are no rules for you. You can go in at the side, you can lie all over the ball, you can be offside, you can tackle the nine, you can do whatever you want. And they get so upset about it, and he enjoys it. He's like, oh, that doesn't bother me. They're all going, what are you doing? You're ruining training. Why are you doing stuff like that? And then we speak about it afterwards, and it's such a powerful conversation to have. I don't have to say anything in that conversation. Just go, guys, how did you feel that he was allowed to do all of that? What was that making you feel like? Well, this was unfair. You weren't doing that. And then you ask him, can you explain what I asked you to do? Can you explain why I gave you that role? And then they're off and they're having that conversation. And then without me even saying anything, they bring it back to a Sunday and go, oh, well, actually, player A from Bournemouth was, we were struggling with that. And now we've been in that situation in a safe environment. They feel they can express how they truly feel. They can deal with it a lot better on a Sunday.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is that, and it's also about, if you're creating those environments, to make sure you give them kind of solutions for how you will react again. So what will you do when that happens in the next match, or if it happens? Deep breathing, going back to all these, really basic psychological skills that players can use in the heat of the moment, blocking out negative thoughts, that sort of controlling, so positive self-talk, so telling themselves that, they can be successful, they can get over the previous setback, or if they've missed a tackle. So it's about creating this, like you say, this safe environment with some challenges, but then giving the players resources to be able to manage those and then to grow from that. I think that's really important.
So Jay's one of the coaches and I'm one of the managers at the academy down here at Wimborne, and we see regularly in games where the game will start off and Wimborne will be immediately on the back foot and go down to an early try from the opposition. And you see them trying to get their heads around it together, and some are better at it and some aren't so good about it. And it might come from a mistake from a defending player or whatever. And I've said this before, my eldest son plays football. He's a goalkeeper, and goalkeepers, I think I mentioned to you in my email, they're a bit of an odd breed anyway, but the mentality of a goalkeeper, especially, I know this is a rugby podcast, bear with me a moment, they're very much on their own. So when he needs to, if he's made a mistake and he then needs to perform, he's got tools that he uses, mental tools, where he goes and changes the channel, if you like, and comes, walks in to his goal, he kicks the post a couple of times, comes away like he's just switched the channel on, like you're not watching something on the telly that you're enjoying, so you just change the channel to something you're happy about. So, and that's kind of how he's been taught to cope with it. But as a goalkeeper, he's very much on his own. If you're in a team and you're on the back foot, like perhaps Wimborne is when they play their first game, and you've got some players that are coping and they've got that ability to handle the stresses, and some that aren't, rather than just expecting the players that aren't to learn how to do it, how do the players that know how to cope with the stresses help the players that don't?
Yeah, so that, I think that's key. So it's about, it's communication, particularly like younger age groups. I hate it when, my boy plays football and, you see, 8 and 9-year-olds berating players for making a mistake, which just drives me mad. So it's about those players, as coaches, you know your players, who are the ones who can cope with it. It's about them, offering some advice, some encouragement to the players. Everyone makes a mistake. You'll get the next one. Let's move on from this. Not as opposed to, oh, bloody hell, you dropped that ball and they've scored a try. Negative body language. It's about managing those aspects. But also, I think it's really important from a coaching perspective that the players feel the environment is supportive, that you as coaches back them, and that, you know, and they're not going to be worried about what you think when they've made a mistake. Because I think, you know, some of the research I've done with younger players, that's a massive stressor is coach and parental criticism. As the players get older, so I've done some stuff with England age group players, England under, I think it was under 18, under 16s or under 18s it was, sorry. And we compared that with some of the professional players who, you know, players in their, you know, late 20s, early 30s, and they're less affected by a number of factors, primarily coach criticism, and also kind of the what the opponents do. So it's really important as coaches that you support your players and let them know that that's, you know, that's the way you feel, and I think hopefully then that should help not going down in the first place. So, you know, often you players make a mistake, they're going to feel bad enough themselves as it is, and particularly if you've just made the mistake, you drop the ball, you've missed the tackle. So it's about how players can respond from that, and, you know, so coping is a key thing. So the strategies that you mentioned there, but it's about picking developing effective strategies. One of the players in our research, he was a Premiership player who had just missed a tackle. It was just dropped a ball, and his coping strategy was there's an inside centre, stand in a position so he couldn't receive the ball on the next play. So that to me is not an effective coping strategy. It's more of an avoidance coping strategy. And as a coach, you know, you wouldn't want your players doing that. And yeah, so it's about, you know, we can respond to stress in, you know, different ways, but it's trying to respond to stress in helping players respond in a helpful and effective way.
Do you think you should spend, as a coach, as much time on the players that can cope to help them pass that same mentality on to the ones that can't? Or
it's difficult, you know, again, if time is, you know, very much a limited resource, it can be just a matter of just, you know, having a quiet, you know, 30-second chat to some of the players who, you know, you can see, you know, their heads don't drop, they respond quicker. It's just, you know, make sure you continue to be positive around your other players, and making sure that, you know, if you see their heads drop, you know, give them some encouragement. I think that's important. Again, there's no wrong or right. It's just kind of, that's what, you know, what I think would help based on, you know, some of the things that I found out.
were you going to say something, Jay?
I was, and then the interesting thing that I like the way you spoke about then is I think you've got a really good realistic understanding of the time sort of pressures on it, because in an ideal sort of world, everybody goes, oh yeah, well, I'm going to put just as much, like you just said then, just as much energy into the people who have an understanding of how to be mentally resilient because they need it. But then, you know, I was literally sort of a bit lost in thought then about some of the groups of players I work with. I actually don't have time to work with the ones that are good at it, because I need to work with the ones that aren't good at it. It's a really interesting point, because actually you are right. The lads that are good at it, just because they're good at it doesn't mean they're good at telling other people why they're good at it and how they're good at it. So actually, for me now, I've just written that down now, that I'm going to allocate some time to work with my leadership team that is good at being mentally resilient, so then they can take some of the workload off us as a management and coaching group, and they can actually go and do some stuff with that. Because, you know, I do that for like specific skills with lads who are good at tackling or catch and pass stuff, so why can't I do that with the mental side of it as well? So thank you, that was good.
Yeah, no, and also, again, and those players could improve just as much and become even better as well from that. But yeah, I completely kind of get that with this time, and that's one, you know, I lectured sports coaches, sports coaching students, who most of them are, you know, some form of coach, whether it's level 1 or a bit slightly higher. And that's one thing that we talk about, you know, implementing different psychology in there. That's one thing that we kind of discuss. So one of the chapters is on leadership, and it's about how to develop athlete leaders. So essentially your captains and and this was and they would say the same thing. Oh yeah, but I don't have time to spend, with my better players. But then how do you, in some ways, if you actually work with the better players, you can spend less time in other things because, they'll be helping out in different areas. So but yeah, I know time is a massive, massive pressure.
For everyone.
Yeah, for everybody. But I know so with coaches. And you do get, you do get sports psychologists who maybe haven't, I'm not saying not play sport, but maybe unaware of, i.e. the pressure on coaches. And one of those pressures is certainly a time pressure. I think that's one good thing about being, kind of spending a few years working on the book with John Callard, and, lots of conversations with him around when he was in England's first team. It's just, you kind of understand how insignificant your role is as a psychologist. It's important, but actually you're there to really support them. Whereas I guess some sports psychologists, he's mentioned a few, I can't mention any names, who have come in and tried to kind of take over. And it's about having an appreciation of what your role is then, and what the constraints the coaches work under.
Do you think that will ever change? Do you think it will become a bit more of a? I mean, it's certainly, it is changing. You look at yourself when you said then, there was nothing like that when you were going through the system, but there certainly is now. Like even at grassroots clubs, I've seen it. They're advertising for player welfare coaches. They're not looking for rugby coaches. They're looking for people who can go and have a. Oh God, I was playing for the twos last week, and now I'm in the fourth. Like, why is that? And then going and dealing with that sort of side of it's becoming so important. But I guess going back to my original question, do you think it will ever become one of the main look-ats?
I think it'll vary from sport to sport. So certainly, individual sports where I guess the players have a lot more control, then I think it, so I've done quite a lot of work in golf, and I think it's much more, it's probably more prevalent there. And I think working and having, met and done research with quite a few high-level rugby union coaches, there is this like kind of inner circle mentality, this trust, issues with trust, and sometimes there is a conflict between, I guess, the coaches and the psychologists, or there can be, in the sense that, sometimes coaches might think, well, they're going behind my back whinging to a sports psychologist. Yeah. The sports psychologist goes back to the coach and said he's been whinging about this, and then it causes that some problems, I guess. So in some sports, I think it will. In others, I think the role is important. I think as well at the moment in sports that are like governed at institute level. So a lot of the sports that run under the Olympic sports, they've all got well-being officers, that sort of thing now. Professional clubs, I think it is getting better, and I think it will continue to improve. And I think more so that it'll be more about mental health awareness, potentially more so than performance issues.
Amazing. I think we're going to have to move. It's a sort of a topic that we could spend a
very long on this one.
Very long. But we've only got you for a limited amount of time. So the next bit that we wanted to, did you want to do halftime now?
Yeah, we'll do halftime now. Yeah,
halftime. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so halftime announcements, not many. Win for Wimborne seconds. Well done, Jay, as captain. Congrats to you. A draw for the first team. And again, if anybody out there, Grassroots Rugby, wants to promote their club, help get some support, whatever, we're happy to promote anything on this podcast at halftime. So get in touch on info@BeMoreRugby or on any of the social media channels, and follow us and like. And of course, the big announcement, Jay, you were going to just touch on.
Obviously, sort of the news that came around. We were getting ready to start training on Thursday, and we'd sort of heard that unfortunately the Queen was unwell, and then suddenly very quickly escalated, and unfortunately she passed away. But the amount of tributes that have come through have been absolutely amazing, and some of the stuff I've seen on social media, what I saw today, they were like, can you stop bringing marmalade sandwiches and Paddington Bears down and stuff like that, because there's just too many of them, which is, I mean, you could only ever hear that on British TV, couldn't you? But it was
Sure.
it was some of the and actually probably for myself, listen to this. They interviewed like a taxi driver, and your typical London cabbie. He was like, God, she's been such a constant in my life for so long, and it was quite amazing actually to see how much she meant to so many people. But yeah, and obviously, it sort of has put the sporting world to a bit of a pause, and we had a lovely minute's silence before our game up at Bridport on Saturday, and yeah, that's sad bit of news, but just we needed to acknowledge it at least.
Yeah, be more rugby, the same as rugby. Full stop is all about respect. So respect where respect is due. So we move on to the second half then. Adam, this is where we talk about our philosophy of the skills, the ethos, the things that we learn in rugby that can help us in our day-to-day lives. Talking to you in the first half's fascinating anyway in the first instance. But you mentioned also that a lot of these successful athletes, especially rugby players, we all know a lot of them, they go on to be successful in business, successful in their personal lives. What would you say rugby gives people that gives them that extra edge in their personal and professional lives?
Yeah, I think rugby in particular gives people so much in terms of being part of a team. So that's important. If learning how to communicate, if you're a captain, having leadership opportunities, understanding the importance of hard work. Hard work in training can lead to superior performances in matches. But I think also, for my, I'm still in touch with some of the guys I played rugby with, and it was only for a short time in terms of that going through those shared experiences seem to last for a long time, and putting yourselves, your body on the line. It's just, I think it just prepares you for stresses and for difficult times, I guess, in your career as well. And also, I guess it gives you a form of confidence. Every time you go on a rugby pitch, I guess, some people probably don't think. I used to think about maybe the injuries. I had concussion a few times, and it was, do I really want to put my head there? And then knowing that you've done that, despite those worries, those fears, it gives you a sense of, I think, of a confidence that you can then take on into other areas. That's I viewed it that way.
That's can completely agree. And I've spent obviously can't name them, but I've spent some time working with a player recently that has been out of rugby for we take the pandemic aside of it, about 3 years now, but because of an injury, and he really had a tough injury and has found it very hard to sort of come back into it. And then I look at the stuff he does in his professional life, and it's like, well, you have taken stuff away from this because, yes, maybe you are not keen to come down and do stuff down at the club, but actually the stuff you're doing now, and we were having a chat about it, and he sort of came to, something that I could see, but he couldn't see, that he's come to a bit of a realization that actually I'm very mentally resilient because I've played rugby and because I've been through stuff like that. And, but, do I really want to be putting my body in those sort of positions, putting my head in there and stuff like that? He's decided no. But then the way he is in his professional life, he's more than prepared to push the boundaries and go out there and do some stuff. And he's very successful because of it. But yeah,
like I say, you kind of made him aware of that. Sometimes, we all have blind spots, all of us do, in different areas of our life. And sometimes just someone actually just, mentioning something, whether, if you're a rugby coach, just saying, your tackling has improved so much, or this has improved. Just that little, bit of encouragement can increase someone's, kind of awareness and actually their confidence.
Yeah, speaking from a personal point of view, as a lot of people that are close to me sort of know, I obliterated my eye socket in a charge down. Yeah. And I must admit, for the first time since I've been 18, on Saturday, I attempted my first charge down since I broke my eye socket. But that's been a very long, well, I'm not charging that box kick down, absolutely no chance. And I've got back into that, today, and that was a little mental note to myself on Saturday. I was like, Oh, well done, Jay. Like, you're either stupid because you've forgotten about it, or you've obviously gotten over it. So it was one of them. But it is mental resilience, isn't it? Big time.
And I do wonder about, professional players, given that some of the severity of their injuries and, how injuries are becoming much more prevalent, and also the serious nature of them, and how they kind of, put that to one side. And I wonder, part of me thinks it's because of, it's their job and they don't have a choice really. They either, stop playing professionally, or they have to just get back on the horse, so to speak. But they must have some of those same fears and insecurities that we all have, I guess.
I heard a psychologist I was listening to a while ago was talking about memories. And he said, if you've got memories that are older than 18 months old, or you've been in circumstances that you remember older than 18 months old, and when you think about them, you get emotionally affected, then you haven't dealt with it properly.
Yeah.
We personally, rugby's helped me, and I didn't play for a long time like yourself. I played for a short time, and through just work and family life, I gave up rugby. But my youngest plays rugby, and I see him going through the system, and he's got aspirations to get quite far in his rugby life, and I've let him run with whatever he wants to do, same as my eldest in his football career, because I personally feel that if they do push themselves, and in all your papers that I promise I will try and get my head around them all, they're quite, but the stresses that you talk about in there, you talk about the stresses, and you're talking about coping with the stresses, and in rugby, like you say, Jay, like yourself, going for that charge down that you haven't gone for that charge down for a long time, but it gives you that ability to overcome things and being a bit stronger. A stress is important in our lives to make us stronger. If we were pampered and kept away from any stresses, we all go to the gym and lift weights, and that's a physical. We all go. Some of us go more than others. We go to the gym, we lift weights, we put our bodies under stress, and the body responds by becoming stronger. Is that the same with the mind?
Yeah,
stress is important.
Yeah, so stress is really important, and it kind of, it energizes, it motivates. So, for example, who likes training on a wet Thursday night if it's horizontal rain?
Guilty.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone. But we all know that those training sessions we go because actually we know if we don't go to those training sessions, we won't play well, in the matches, i.e. when they're stressful. So having that stress. So I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So I last year I competed at the British Open. I'm going to go again this year. And I hate hill running, but I know that last year, I wasn't quite as fit as I should have been, and I've got to get fit this year. So I'm using that stress, the anticipation of the stress I'm going to be feeling when I'm out there, as a motivation. So one, it can be used as I think as a really good motivation. Two, it kind of prepares us for actually having to perform, under pressure. Generate emotional responses, hormonal responses. That fight flight thing that get us ready to perform. But the key thing is how we interpret it. Now, we can interpret stress as a challenge. So focusing on what we want to do, what can go right, and not seeing the symptoms as dangerous. Whereas when we experience stress as a threat, we focus on what's going wrong. And actually, if we start, breathing a little bit, we can start to worry about that. We can start to feel unsafe. And that's, so it's just about realizing, understanding those symptoms are not dangerous, and kind of reinterpreting them as useful. So one thing that kind of finding came out in one of my studies when we interviewed, it was actually a former British and Irish Lions player. And I remember at the time I was doing some of the work with John, and I was feeding John Card, I was feeding some of this back, and he said, right, yeah, I'm going to use that, and I'm going to say that stress is like adrenaline to fuel your performance. So in the short term, it is. I think the issue with stress is when it becomes chronic, and it's something that happens. So you don't. So for example, most athletes, virtually all athletes, get those pre-game nerves when you're feeling really tense, which can often dissipate when you start playing. But it's if you have that stress every morning, every day, every night, when it's chronic. And I think that's when it becomes a real, a problem. It's unhealthy, it's unhealthy, it's not conducive to well-being, it's not conducive to performance. So small amounts which are managed I think are vitally important, because it gets you, that optimal level to perform.
I can remember it was my first ever time playing senior rugby, and a brilliant guy. He still plays around here now, and it was with an awesome guy called Kev Busby, and he's still still going strong at the age of 102. But he's a brilliant guy, and I was 17, and we were away. It was a third team cup game away to Swans, and I was like, oh God, Buzz, I'm really nervous. I've only ever played like Colts rugby. I'm nervous. And he just put his arm around me and he went, "You'd be a freak if you weren't, mate."
And it's true, though. It's true.
100%. And then after that, I was like, it's become a lot more manageable. And I still get nervous, before every game and stuff like that. And if I'm traveling away, and a big thing for me is I need to drive to games. I don't like getting lifts with other people. I need to drive to the game. I need to do that. And I look at the sat nav and stuff like that, and it gets to 10 minutes, and then that feeling in my stomach starts coming. I start, I listen to a certain few songs and stuff like that, and then that's it. That's done. I don't have to worry about that anymore. And then you get it before like the coin toss or whatever, and then I'm fine. It's relaxed and stuff like that. But I think for anybody that is playing rugby and is suffering so much from those like nerves all the time, no matter what age you are, just go and speak to somebody. Go and say, look, I'm struggling with this side of the game, because people are more than happy to go and look. I'm struggling with my throwing in at the line out. I'm struggling with my kicking. Nobody's prepared to go up to their coach and say, I'm actually really struggling with the mental side of it, like 2 days before the game. But yeah, that's a really good point. That
one thing I can say for sure is so in the study, one of the studies I sent you over, it was with an Irish. At the time, it was a Celtic League. It was one of the Irish regions, professional team. All of the players subsequently were fully capped by Ireland. I can't mention names, but there's 2 or 3 in particular who suffered really badly with stress in terms of mistakes, in particular mistakes, so missing tackles, poor decisions, and these players were playing at the highest level of, I guess, of world rugby. They're internationals. So to think that, if you're coaching younger players, it's about explaining that, it's not like, say, it's normal to feel this. We know that all athletes feel this, even some of the professionals who are experienced feel this. And I think sometimes just reminding young players this can actually make them feel a bit better about themselves, and a bit more, like you say, a bit better about themselves.
I had an experience in business years ago, where I had a very particularly disagreeable client. I was working for a company, and he was absolutely insistent on being as negative as possible and as difficult as possible, and he made everybody uncomfortable and not want to deal with him. But my position at the time was to have to deal with him, and I was receiving some executive coaching at the time through a psychologist who we'd sit down and we'd talk about how to approach things positively and all the rest. And all the time, and she was very lovely and very helpful. All the time I was talking with her about how you approach this situation where you're going to go into conflict. It was always about going into it positively. And obviously in rugby, when you're looking at any conflict on the rugby pitch, when you're going into a tackle, and we always try and coach this, you've got to go and meet that conflict positively. You've got to go to it, and you've got to be positive about going there, almost looking forward to the conflict. Because if you're standing off and you're nervous, you're going to get broken. You're going to get knocked over. So I started to think, while I was talking to her and about these particular scenarios where you end up having to go into conflict, I started trying to, and you've spoken about this, obviously, about visualization as well, about how you would approach that situation positively. And I ended up going to see the guy I put a big smile on my face.
Yeah.
I took a big deep breath. I made myself feel good, like I wanted to go and enjoy some time with him. And I walked in, big smile, stuck out my hand, shook his hand, said how great it was to see him, how things were looking great. And I know there was a few issues and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden he starts backtracking, going, oh yeah, well, I know in my email I was a bit difficult and it is looking good, but I am just a bit. And we talked, and I couldn't have been more pleased to be there in that situation. And it was like I just bowled him over. He started backpedaling and started apologizing and all, which he'd never done before. And it made me think, this is part of the reason I kind of went down the route I'm going down with Jay with the Be More Rugby stuff. If you're on the rugby pitch and you have to meet some force that's coming towards you, the more positive you can be, the better the outcome.
And if you think about it, you know, relating to a coaching perspective, if you're coaching, you know, I don't know, a squad of 20 players or 22 players, 25 players, you know, there are going to be players in there who cause conflict, who cause maybe conflict among teammates, who cause conflict with you, maybe disagree with some of the things you said, or a disruptive influence. It's like, how do you as a coach help not manage them, but manage the situation to ensure that, you know, their negative impact is reduced to, you know, what it can be. You know, you hear of, what was it Eddie Jones said before the World Cup, he called a few of his players who he perceived to be a negative influence. And I guess at a professional level, you know, perhaps you can do that, but maybe at amateur level, when you're short of players, it's like, how can you work with those players? And like you did in that situation, to actually resolve the situation, make them feel better about themselves, and so they become more of a positive influence. And I think as a coach, you've actually done a really good job in that situation, because you've someone who may have been a bit negative, now you've given them skills, you've worked with them to be more positive, and that will have a hopefully more beneficial impact in the rest of their life, the rest of their playing career.
How do you, because I'm massively interested in that sort of topic, how do you instigate that conversation with a player that is negative, that is causing conflict amongst your squad, that, you know, you don't have a good relationship with? How do you start that conversation?
Yeah,
Gets you to a point.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's really difficult. It's really delicate, and I look at it as, you know, as I've been, you know, in my job, I have leadership positions now, and, you know, managing people, work with people, and for me, I always think it's about trying to understand their point of view. So, what is it that what is it? What do they think about situation X or situation Y, or the current? You know, is it their, so, for example, in a rugby situation, they might not want to play the position they're being asked to play in. They not feel as though they're getting enough minutes, not enough responsibility. So what is it about them, or what is it about their current situation? And then as a coach, you can start discussions about perhaps not necessarily changing situations, but actually working with them so they kind of see the situation differently, I think. It is hard, because sometimes you just get, you know, in life you do get people who, you know, who just like to cause a little bit of trouble, but it's like how you kind of manage that, and I guess managing their expectations. And yeah, I don't think there's any quick fix to those situations. It's more of a kind of a longer term process, but certainly initiating discussions with them about kind of their viewpoint, I think that's really important. And then again, it can maybe facilitate kind of a way forward.
We often talk on our podcast, we talk to our guests about what rugby means to them. We talk about what advice they'd have for players and so on. And talking to you so fascinating, because, you know, it's there's so many lessons, and like Jay said, we could talk all night. So mindful we've got time, but just wanted to ask, as a psychologist, a sports psychologist, what have you learned from rugby that helps you in your daily life?
Yeah, the biggest thing I learned from rugby is that when I feel I'm tired, when I feel I've got nothing left to give, when I feel I've emptied the tank, I do have more to give, you know, from a physical perspective. But I also think that relates to kind of a psychological perspective too. So, you know, certain days when you think, oh God, I can't, you know, I'm worn out, I can't do any more. Actually, you still can. And that's probably the biggest, and that's the same from jiu-jitsu. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that you can always do, I guess, more than probably what your mind thinks you can do, or kind of lets you lets you do. Really, there's always that bit in reserve, and probably a lot more than what you think it would be.
Yeah.
Certainly, yeah, I certainly think it's about 30% more minimum, if not more.
Really? 30%?
Yeah, in my experience, for me anyway, I'm sure other people who've got the warning signs don't come in their mind until they're 90% drained. Mine are maybe about 70 or 80, so I know I've always got more left. And I think that is something I've definitely learned. Yeah, definitely.
And you use that daily?
I try to, yeah, definitely, yeah. I'm not saying I get fatigued all the time, but certainly there's certain times when I have done. I might have been working on a paper, a grant application. Just, oh God, I can't do any more on this. And actually, you can. And just, maybe sometimes just taking a bit of time away and then, rethinking about something.
That's great.
So what would you hope that young players take, like our academy lads that are here, but all girls and boys that are playing rugby that don't go into professional rugby but go into adulthood?
Yeah.
What do you hope that they would get?
Well, so first and foremost, I hope that that they enjoy their time playing rugby. They enjoy the competition. They enjoy the training. My own son who plays football, I'm not certain it's the same for. And I think football and rugby are different in that way at grassroots level, certainly in terms of maybe parental pressure. But in terms of kind of what they can take away, is just about taking away the times when they felt under pressure and they've actually done something well. So they might have been a bit worried about making a tackle, but they went for the tackle. They might have been worried about charging the high ball down, but they did it. So taking away those positive instances where they were feeling a bit nervous, a bit anxious about something, but actually they came through it. I think that is a lesson in life that we all need, and it can last us forever, really.
Just to be clear, I got absolutely nowhere near that, Charles. It's the thought that counts. Is that?
You went for it, though, didn't you? Yeah.
A big hurdle, though, isn't it? A big hurdle to overcome that fear of what you're about to put yourself, on the line for.
100%.
So now you go and do a presentation or something at work that you're not a little bit anxious about. It's remembering those things when you've overcome them. It's like, well, what did you do at that time? How did you get over that? Well, I'm going to do that again this time. And I think that's a massive lesson that rugby, and I guess a lot of sports, but I think particularly rugby with the physical nature of it, is good.
So when's your next competition in jiu-jitsu then?
December, so the British Open again. So yeah, so I'm training. I did some hill runs the other day, which were pretty nasty. Yeah, not good. But then honestly, I used that so I competed last year in that competition, and I kind of expected that I would, how I'd feel, and I did feel quite, anxious, like you say when you play rugby, of all those feelings. But I probably felt like I lacked a bit of conditioning, and I know if I get a bit fitter, I think some ways it's easy to handle those negative emotions, that adrenaline. So this year I'm, trying to get a little bit fitter for it, and I'm just going to try and look forward to it. And one thing that is interesting is that, so when I was there, I was like, I'm never ever doing another competition like this again, never ever. But by the Tuesday, I'd already signed up for my next one. So it's that love-hate thing, isn't it? It's like, when you stop playing rugby, you miss the adrenaline. When you've got it that 10 minutes before, I don't think you miss it. But it's something there, I think.
So when you're competing in jiu-jitsu and you're perhaps on the floor and you're thinking that you're going to get beat, have you turned it around with that mentality of, actually, I've got another little bit in the tank?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, certainly in training, lots of times. But also as well, just having confidence in my training. So having I'd say as well, my jiu-jitsu coach, he's probably one of the best coaches I've ever had in any sport that I've played, and probably one of the best that I've witnessed as a psychologist. And I'd say I have complete and utter trust in him. So I know that for any different situation, I feel that we've got something prepared. So if I'm in a bad position, for example, I feel we've got something prepared that I know will work, and it has been tested under stressful situations. So I think I take confidence from my belief in my coach as well. And I think maybe coaches don't realize how important they are. in those situations, when actually, they're massively important. Players often look up to them much more than probably what they think, and take confidence from them.
I was very, very fortunate at the weekend to play with a lad that I've coached for a couple of years, and at the college I used to work at, and he left the college, and I've obviously moved on to other things now, and he'd been a bit out of rugby and stuff like that, and he made his senior debut at the weekend, and I was very, very honoured to be a part of that, and he definitely nearly got the old waterworks. I hope he doesn't listen to this, but he was like, stuff that I'd never. I'm quite hypocritical because I say to other coaches that I work with and stuff like, oh wow, you've had such a massive influence on that person. You need to like take hold of that. But then when you actually hear that directly, where somebody says, thank you for everything you've done, and this has been a long time coming, and it means a lot. It does definitely take you back a bit, and it's a bit like, I don't do the coaching for anything other than I enjoy working with people and I enjoy having good relationships with people. I honestly don't care less about like results and things like that, but it is that other side to it that coaches and managers in particular as well need to recognize, that they need to pick themselves up a bit and say, these amount of relationships they've built with people, it is such a big thing.
There'll be, if you've coached for a few years, hundreds of players, or lots and lots of players who you might not think you've had much of an impact on at all, and actually they remember a lot of the things that you did for them, which have really helped them out. And
that's that is definitely the danger of in my own like sort of review we've spoken about with I've got a couple of people that I work with from my mental side of like the job I do and coaching and things like that. It is, they talk about spreading yourself too thin, and because I work with such a large group of we were trying to work it out in numbers, I'd probably end up coaching throughout the different environments I work with in a year. I'd probably end up coaching around to 100 to 150 different kids. Now for me, I don't think maybe I haven't actually had that much of an impact on them, but you don't know, like you just said then, you have no idea. You could say something that just resonates with somebody and sticks with somebody that you think, oh, do you know what, player A, I haven't worked very hard with, and I haven't built a relationship with, and then you can hear something they say and you're like, oh wow, I said that 2 months ago, and they're still on it. It is great, and coaches need to take note.
Yeah, I agree.
Is there plenty of people you still keep in touch with that you've helped through rugby?
Yeah, there's, I would say maybe keep in touch, but I keep an eye on them, certainly. I'll always, coaches, players, I'll often, I'll know all the results of their matches. I always, make a point of looking, and yeah, definitely. And then, we get the odd email now and again, a bit, but yeah, I still always know, I know all the results. Yeah, definitely. And I know, some of them are international teams and in minor tiers, lower tiers, but I still, make an effort to see how they're doing. Yeah, definitely.
Adam, we could talk for hours and hours and hours, but we are definitely need to start wrapping things up. Just from there are going to be a lot of people who I know that listen to this that are going to be very keen to hear more from you. So where can they find like your papers, your books and stuff like that? Where can they find you?
I think probably the best thing would be LinkedIn. I update that regularly. I write quite a few posts on there, probably 2 or 3 a week, which kind of reflect my research findings, observations, ideas for coaches. So LinkedIn, Adam Nicholls on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, but it's probably a bit more personal, but A+Nick. My email address, if anyone wants to get in touch, is a.nichols@hull.ac.uk. But I'd probably say LinkedIn is probably the best platform, and I certainly update that, regularly.
And obviously, you got your 3rd edition of your psychology and sports coaching book out. There's also Focused for Rugby, which I highly recommend any coaches and players get hold of that one. That's brilliant. I'm working my way through that, and everything I've read so far is so insightful. So, but yeah, I think time has beaten us,
as it always does.
Jay, I think I've got so much from this one, and thank you, Adam, so much.
Thank you.
I mean, just talking about how you deal with the stresses and how those stresses can be positive, both physical and mentally, and and also the lessons that you gain from rugby. Just like you said, Adam, that actually you can be on your knees sometimes, just generally in life, but you can find that little extra if you got that mentality from rugby.
100%.
What about yourself, Jay?
As some people know, with the new job, I've been very, very passionate about the life lessons that rugby can give you, and the stuff that the other bonus side of that it gives you away from rugby. And I'm very fortunate now to be able to use that sort of mindset within a job to help the forgotten group of society and stuff like that. And I think the stuff that you've said around the stuff that we've been talking about has really, really sat with me, and I am actually looking forward to going and listening back to it, because probably got a bit of cognitive overload. I've listened to quite a lot and taken quite a lot of stuff away, and there's stuff I want to revisit. But yeah, just some of the stuff you said, Adam, really, really, really sat with me, and I think it's been great.
Yeah, so to everyone that's listening, I hope you got loads from that. And as I say, check out Adam's papers and books and bits and pieces, because it's just, there's so much good stuff in there to help generally in your day-to-day lives, your life, your rugby, your sports, whatever it is. It's all fantastic. And obviously get in touch with us, follow us on Instagram, on TikTok, on all of the other bits and pieces, on YouTube. Give us a like, give us a follow, so you don't miss any episodes. Jay, thank you very much again.
Thanks, James. Thank you, Adam.
No, cheers. Thank you so much as well. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Been a real pleasure. And to everybody else, till next time, be more rugby.